Yeah. Yeah, a bit of a bummer, this COVID-19 thing. We had a mad, crazy January for Holocaust Memorial Day. We actually we launched a virtual reality based exhibition. We launched one of the things that you mentioned, Vicky, in your introduction, a big football project. Lots of A-list football people. And pop-ups in London. So that was all with a view to taking it all on the road, and that kind of hasn't happened. But because, as I said earlier, we reasonably savvy with digital platforms and outreach, because we were doing that already. It was a question of how can you best recreate those things in a digital environment. And my big criticism of wearing a museum hat rather than a pure learning hat is that I don't think there's any museum website I have ever seen anywhere in the world at any time that truly uses the web to its best advantage. It's usually a pale imitation of the real thing. And I hold my hand up, we haven't cracked it yet either, but we're going to bloody well have a go. Because there must be ways of using the intimacy and the multi-modality, if that's a word, of the web to allow people to experience what we want them to experience in new and fresh ways. For our part, what we've done so far is take things which we know are really emotive and really resonate with, particularly with young people today. So we have created online learning programs, both live and pre-recorded and downloadable. For example, around the football films. So the football film I relate to, we created in the first place because there's a resurgence of racism on the soccer football terraces. Surprise, surprise, when times get bad, this kind of ugliness resurfaces. Football is a window to a nation's soul. I firmly believe that. And so we wanted to do something about that. And we created a film which analogizes hate on the football terraces, and showed how it is absolutely analogous to the way that hate began in pre-Nazi Germany and Nazi Germany. So you have very powerful juxtapositions of football and 80-year-old, 90-year-old images. Well, that's great for an online YouTube kind of audience, because you can, and we have built entire programs around that. We had for Belsen 75, we had an entire government funded program in collaboration with some other British Holocaust educators. We had a Belsen Survivor Re-Salt with our first ever online, fully accessible on-demand version of the Forever Project, Re-Salt, Belsen Survivor. As part of that experience, we've obviously been able to keep that part of it, whilst the other physical outreach parts of it have gone. But we've modified the way that our audiences interact with that. The last thing we would do is just shove it up online and let anyone ask whatever they wanted of the survivor concerned. It's not for that. So how do you moderate? Well, Zoom is a great way because you can control by time and by subject matter. If you're going wider on Facebook, then again, you have to put certain controls in place. So it's always trying to think about preserving content and the integrity of the content, but with the reality of the audience as you now find them. And as I was saying before, if you're on Facebook, it just is not the same as a formal piece of primary or secondary school learning. You have to adapt accordingly. The thing that I'm gutted at more than anything else, I'll leave on this one, is that another big, I call this our 100th anniversary year because it's 75 years since the Holocaust, but 25 years also since Stephen and his family founded our place. And we had some mighty big plans for that. Stephen, you should know all the plans. You don't even know what we've got planned. Well, now do I. So we'll try and figure something out whenever lockdown is finally over, but I'm determined that we mark it in some way.
So thank you, Marc. And I know from going to the National Holocaust Centre and Museum myself, its location is quite significant because it's not as many institutions are in a city centre. It's kind of, for me as a born and bred Londoner, kind of in the middle of nowhere in the Midlands somewhere, or up north, as we like to say, when we live south of the M25. And its location.
Well, I always say we're sorry, I was just saying we always say we're the leaders in the field. And when I mean say field, I mean field, because our cows and sheep are our immediate competition.
Yeah, and kind of that journey to your centre in itself is always quite powerful and meaningful. It has to be a very purposeful journey. You don't stumble across unless you're incredibly lost in the Nottingham countryside. Yeah, I guess particularly for your site, the physical site is incredibly important. And I hope, I wish you well with doing some commemorations for that anniversary soon. Could we move on to
Yeah.
Heather then?
Okay, so our lockdown occurred a few weeks before Yom HaShoah, and traditionally what happens in South Africa is that Cape Town will have its own Yom HaShoah, Johannesburg will have theirs, and Durban will have theirs, and they organize, and it's normally under the auspices of what is called the Jewish Board of Deputies, which is an umbrella that looks after the welfare and is the voice, in inverted commas, of many of the Jewish communities. However, this year we weren't able to have a Yom HaShoah, so the Board of Deputies on a national level decided to do a national Yom HaShoah, and they did it in collaboration with the 3 Holocaust centers that we have in South Africa: Johannesburg, Durban, and Cape Town. We kicked it off by a 24-hour portrait project of where we selected 24 survivors, and through a poster we told you a little bit about where they came from, what happened to them, what was their story, when were they born, when did they pass away, or if they're still alive, and what they actually went through. And then a pre-recorded Yom HaShoah was created, where footage was used and photographs from all the different centers around South Africa. Some people sang on Zoom, and it was edited into a Yom HaShoah event. I think that a lot of people had expected something completely different, so they were overwhelmed by how wonderful it was and how meaningful it had come through. And I think it just, from a South African, and our Jewish community is a fairly small community in South Africa, it made people feel very close and a part of. It was sent out on YouTube and through it was first sent out as a live event via the website of the Board of Deputies, and then it was put onto YouTube, and quite a number of people were watching the live feed and watched afterwards. It's always very difficult to have commemorations where you are apart from everybody, because I think just being together in the same space allows a different kind of emotion that comes through. I think that our Yom HaShoah just allowed that unity, that feeling of being together, of still being able to pay our respects to what happened and those that are still with us. Who knows what it's going to be like for Yom HaShoah next year? We might find that we have to do the same kind of thing because social distancing will still be a reality next year. But it's very difficult. I loved, Marc, your football campaign. It was absolutely brilliant. And it certainly was an eye-opener. And I know that it went viral around the world because we certainly were watching and waiting for each footballer to come out with what they had to say. I think what we really have to be cognizant of is that whatever videos we create or whatever we open up on social media, is that we have to be cognizant of what the subject matter is, and being able to portray it in such a way that you still are respectful of the subject, you are respectful of the survivors, and that you are not diluting things because you want to get something out there. I think that we have to really be careful of this. It certainly doesn't take away from the centre and what we do at a centre under traditional, under normal times, but I think that it is a part and we need to use it, but we have to be very careful about how we use social media.
Thank you, Heather. And it's one of the things I've been looking at in my research, which has been about digital in Holocaust museums, but I've started trying to write something particularly about this moment, this doing what would have been very live commemorations. And I think you drew upon the thing that I'm really interested in, is that if commemorations are about being together in the same physical geographic place, then if we do that online, is it still commemoration, or do we create some other kind of memory practice? It seems to offer some interesting opportunities to think about what else we can do alongside what we traditionally think of as commemoration. But it was really interesting to see at Bergen-Belsen and other camps how often the physical laying of wreaths was still really, really significant this year, despite the fact that crowds couldn't come. And so we see, I think really importantly, that the physicality and the place as being central to these commemorations. Stephen, as your mic is queued on already, could you pick up on commemorations and USC Shoah's relationship with that?
Yeah, we actually had a full plan for April this year, where USC Shoah Foundation was involved in programs in both in Poland for joining with March of the Living and having a delegation being in Poland, and we also were going to be involved through Bergen-Belsen and their 75th anniversary. So, first of all, not only did I find that my travel plans got changed, but actually many of the stakeholders that support the Shoah Foundation and involved in it have planned to be coming from all around the world to be part of that. A couple of very interesting things happened as a result of this. First of all, one of the things that we have been working at with the USC Shoah Foundation and March of the Living is thinking about, so what does commemoration look like in the future when Holocaust survivors are not able to be part of those gatherings in those places? And we have a digital program called Testimony on Location, where we've been interviewing Holocaust survivors that go with organizations like March of the Living, and they go to the different locations, and we film them in 360 on those locations, and it's part of a digital app. It's an app called iWalks. And what was interesting was, in this situation, was that we were still able to share that digital content. We were still able to work with March of the Living to extend their mission to their participants by working together to put an online March of the Living commemoration together, which included tens of thousands of people, but also to really honor the stories of the survivors and say, even though we're not able to be together, in a sense, I hate to use this term, but it was almost like a dress rehearsal for what happens when we can't be together in future, and how are we going to make that work right now. So I wouldn't say it was a good outcome, because I think being together is always better than being apart, but in the context of what we were doing, it was a very powerful experience to do and share together. I would also say that one of the things that we experienced through the having to make these changes was we saw also how other organizations were working together. For example, I love the fact that Yad Vashem put online the online reading of the names, because that really then created this global moment on the internet where everybody could participate in that. So in a sense, and there was other organizations like We Remember Together, which is a relatively small and young organization here in the United States that doesn't have a physical presence, like maybe the US Holocaust Museum or some other big entities here in the United States, but they were able to use their digital presence actually to network together with different organizations and help them to bring up their programs. So I think the collaborative side of this was very meaningful actually, and I think it could help us to model for ourselves as organizations that are about memory and education, how can we use the digital space in a more collaborative way to make use of the fact that the Holocaust Centre in the UK may have one particular digital tool, and Yad may have another digital tool, and all of our organizations pool those resources to the benefit of our different audiences. So I think if we can get anything out of this from a commemorative point of view, is let's try and figure out how to share this to create a bigger community.
And Anna.
Okay, so in comparison to January, where we had a town hall which was full of attendees, obviously we had to look at different ways of commemoration in April. So our director, Jane Josem, and co-president Pauline Rockman organised the Yom HaShoah event with a community radio station called J-Air, which is the Jewish program. And this is an analog technology of how to keep the survivors connected. But it was also available to tune in online. And our AV producer, Robbie Simons, put together some recordings that were taken previously so that there wouldn't be any technical glitches of survivors who were the nominated candle lighters. And so the survivors would speak, and then there was a 1950s recording of Shlomo Katz singing El Malei Rachamim, which is the prayer for the soul of the departed. And it was all very moving, and it's actually captured online, so it is on our website. And I believe it's now a record of this unusual time and this different format. And there were about 1,000 people who listened in via, so it could be gauged via the Facebook link, which captured the analytics. But there would have been many more people who were listening on the radio, which we couldn't get the statistics for. And if you would mind putting up the slide, Victoria. You can see on the slide, this is our wonderful Director of Testimonies, Philip Maisel. He's 98 years old, nearly 98, and he was one of the candle lighters. So you can see how before the actual event, on the days leading up to it, each of the candle lighters, the survivors, they would be featured as a post with a little bit of information about what they went through. And so it was this real emotional lead up until the event. And you can see on the other side from the Facebook event which advertised the event, you can see there are 1,600 views, and which, given the Australian population and the Jewish population in Melbourne is very, very strong. And so I consider it mourning simultaneously in public and private, and that's by survivors themselves as well as their descendants, who feel very connected to their family, the survivors in their families, who are either still with us or have passed away. Straight after this session, there was another event which was aimed at a younger audience, so the descendants of survivors, and it was our Education Engagement Manager, Jennifer Levitt-Maxwell, who co-hosted a Zoom session with a young Jewish Australian group called Launchpad. And they invited all of us in our homes to light candles, which was really beautiful and meaningful. And they had some nominated people to guide us through it, who were from the JHC community, and around 500 people joined this Zoom session. And what you could do is, in the chat function, you could write in a name or multiple names of the people that you wanted to commemorate. So it was a really interesting way of doing it. This is from personal experience, you could cry a little bit more freely than if you were in public and had to maintain a more composed disposition. So both of the events were really, really beautiful. And I think that this is just another way of adapting to the circumstances.